Mafia boss brings home his pregnant black maid. What he sees on her necklace freezes him cold. The rain had been falling for hours, a steady cold curtain sweeping across the long driveway of the Romano estate. The headlights of a black sedan cut through the storm as it rolled to a stop, and the man who stepped out moved with the slow, controlled force of someone who was used to fear parting before him like water. Dominic Romano had faced rivals, gunfire, and betrayal more times than he could count, but nothing in his world of calculation and danger had prepared him for the sight of the woman curled in the back seat. Her name was Elara, a soft-spoken housemaid who rarely lifted her eyes when men in dark suits passed her in the hallway. Tonight, she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, her clothes soaked through, her hands gripping her swollen belly, as if shielding the life within her was the only anchor she had left in the world. Dominic did not bring people home. He did not rescue employees. He did not break his own rules. Yet here he was, lifting Elara out of the car with arms that had carried wounded soldiers on darker nights. When she tried to stand, her knees buckled and she leaned into him as if trusting him was an instinct she no longer had the strength to fight. The courtyard lights flickered across her skin, revealing bruises that had not been there the last time he saw her. Dominic felt something unfamiliar press against his chest, something that felt suspiciously like anger on behalf of someone who was not him. As he bent to steady her, a small silver glint slipped from beneath her damp shirt. It was a necklace on a thin chain, old and worn, the kind of jewelry that carried stories more than value. The pendant swung in the air for only a moment, but that moment was enough to turn Dominic's breath into ice. He recognized it, not because it was expensive, but because it should not exist anymore. His hand froze inches from hers while the rain drummed around them like distant thunder. Elara did not notice his reaction. She was too focused on staying upright, too focused on the quiet tremor of fear that had taken root in her chest. Dominic finally closed his fingers around her arm and guided her inside the house, but his eyes never left the necklace. For the first time in many years, the man who controlled empires found his pulse unsteady. He knew that pendant. He knew the woman who had once worn it. And he knew that whatever truth Elara carried with her was about to tear open a past he had buried in concrete. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that had just begun inside him. Dominic guided Elara through the wide front doors, and the warmth of the foyer wrapped around her like a blanket after the brutal rain. The light from the chandelier above cast a soft golden glow across the marble floor, and for a moment she blinked at the contrast between this place and the cold storm she had just escaped. Her breath trembled in her chest, uneven and shallow, and she kept one hand pressed protectively against her belly, as if every movement of her child reminded her to stay alert, to stay gentle, to stay alive. In the quiet of the entrance hall, Dominic finally loosened his hold on her arm. He did not step back far, as though unsure she could stand on her own. Elara lifted her gaze only halfway, her lashes still wet, afraid to meet the eyes of the man who ruled this estate like a kingdom. She had worked for him for almost 7 months. Yet she knew almost nothing about him beyond the hard truths whispered among the staff. They said he was a man capable of ending a life with a single command. They said he did not tolerate mistakes, emotions, or weakness. They said no one in this house mattered to him except his family, and he did not have much family left. But tonight, he had stopped his car for her. He had lifted her with his own hands, and he had seen the necklace she had kept hidden for so long. Elara gathered her courage, pushing a strand of wet hair behind her ear. "Sir, I am very grateful." Her voice shook despite her effort to steady it. "I can manage from here." She took a small, unsteady step away, but Dominic raised one hand lightly, stopping her without touching her. "You are not going anywhere by yourself," he said, his voice low and even, yet carrying a weight that left no room for argument. "You can barely stand." For a moment, the foyer was silent except for the soft dripping of rainwater sliding off her clothes and landing onto the marble beneath them. Elara hated that sound. Each drop felt like a reminder that she had entered a world she did not belong in. Dominic studied her closely, his expression unreadable, but his eyes kept drifting toward the silver pendant now resting against her damp shirt. Elara felt the shift in his attention, saw the tension in the lines of his jaw, and her hand moved instinctively to cover the necklace, as if shielding it would shield the memory it held. He inhaled slowly. That necklace. Where did a housemaid like you get something like that? His tone was calm, but something in it made Elara's heart pound harder. She swallowed before answering in a voice barely above a whisper. It belonged to my mother. The words seemed to land heavily between them. Dominic looked as if he were weighing each syllable, searching them for something he dreaded finding. How long have you had it? Since I was a child, sir. My mother said it was the only thing she had from a night she could never speak about. She told me to guard it, no matter what. Dominic felt his pulse tighten. He had heard those same words before, spoken by a woman whose face had haunted him for more than a decade. A woman he had failed. He tried to force the memory back into the shadows of his mind where it had lived for so long, but the pendant glimmered again under the light, dragging the past into the present with painful clarity. Elara, unaware of the storm unraveling inside him, tried to steady herself. Her legs felt weak from exhaustion, and the cold from the rain seemed to seep into her bones. Her pregnancy made her balance fragile, and she wavered slightly before Dominic reached out to support her once more. The moment she leaned into him, he noticed how light she felt, far lighter than a woman carrying a child should feel. When was the last time you ate? Elara blinked, startled by the question. Earlier today, sir. She hesitated, then admitted softly, it was not much. Dominic exhaled, a slow breath that carried frustration he could not voice. You are going to the guest room on the second floor. I will have someone bring food and dry clothes. You need to lie down before you collapse on my floor. Elara opened her mouth to protest, but the exhaustion in her body overruled her pride. She gave a small nod, her breath trembling as she let him steady her once more. As they began moving deeper into the house, Dominic glanced at the necklace one more time. A cold certainty spread through him. This woman, this unborn child, and that pendant were all tied to a past he had never intended to face. And now, whether he liked it or not, the truth was walking beside him. Dominic guided Elara slowly through the long hallway, and each step she took revealed more of the world she had only ever cleaned from a distance. The Romano estate was a place built to display power. The walls were lined with framed oil paintings, each one illuminated by warm golden sconces. The polished wood floors reflected the soft lighting like a quiet river, and even the air carried a scent of cedar and warm leather from the nearby study. Elara had walked these hallways many times, but always with her head lowered, whispering apologies whenever men in dark suits passed her. She knew the rules. Housemaids were not supposed to be seen. They were not supposed to linger. They were certainly not supposed to walk beside the man who owned the entire place. Her fingers tightened instinctively around her necklace, feeling its familiar shape against her skin as though it could steady her trembling breath. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, afraid that even one wrong glance might erase whatever mercy had brought her here. Behind her, Dominic watched her movements closely. There was something fragile about the way she walked, almost like she had learned to take up as little space as possible in this giant mansion. As they reached the end of the hallway, her steps became slower, less stable. She stopped near the entrance to the living room, one hand bracing herself against the wall. Dominic stepped closer, prepared to catch her if needed. You are pushing yourself too hard, he said quietly. You need to sit down. Elara shook her head with a small, strained breath. I can keep going. I do not want to trouble anyone, sir. Her voice cracked on the last word, not out of disrespect, but from the effort of trying to hide how weak she felt. Dominic glanced toward the grand staircase ahead of them. The second-floor guest room was still a long walk, especially for someone who looked like she had not rested in days. He made a quick decision and gestured for her to follow him through the archway into the living room. Sit, he repeated in a deeper tone that left no room for refusal. Elara obeyed, lowering herself carefully onto the edge of a long dark leather sofa. The cushions dipped lightly under her weight, and she held her belly as if waiting for the child to settle. Dominic stepped back just enough to observe her without crowding her. The room around them was grand, almost intimidating, with a tall stone fireplace and shelves filled with leather-bound books. A large window overlooked the rain-soaked grounds, and faint thunder trembled through the glass. Elara had always seen this room from the doorway while dusting the corners. She had never imagined sitting inside it. As the minutes passed, her breathing slowly steadied. She brushed her thumb along the edge of the necklace again, as though making sure it had not disappeared. Dominic noticed the gesture, and the quiet tension in his face returned. "Why have I never seen you wear that before?" he asked in a tone that was rough in a way she did not understand. Elara hesitated. "I keep it under my clothes while I work," she explained softly. "My mother told me it was not safe to show it." Dominic felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Not safe to show it. He took a slow breath, remembering the woman who had spoken those very words so many years ago. Elara continued quietly, unaware of the storm gathering behind his eyes. "She worked very hard her whole life. She always said this necklace was the only thing she could pass on to me." Her voice softened into something almost mournful. "She told me it came from a night that changed everything for her, but she would not tell me what happened." Dominic lowered his gaze for a brief second, almost as if steadying himself. His voice, when he spoke again, was controlled but quieter than before. "And you have never wondered what that night was?" Elara nodded. "I have wondered every day. But she said the truth would come to me when the time was right." For a moment, the room felt unnaturally still. The rain outside softened to a distant whisper. Dominic stared at the pendant, recognizing every line, every curve, every memory attached to the woman who had once worn the same piece around her neck. Elara looked down at her hands, unaware of the weight of history sitting only inches away. She had no idea why her mother had feared that night, or why the necklace made Dominic look at her with a frozen expression that hovered between disbelief and guilt. As Dominic finally stepped back and reached for a nearby blanket to drape over her shoulders, one truth settled heavily inside him. This woman and the life she carried were connected to a past he had tried to bury. And the mansion he ruled with iron certainty suddenly felt too small to hold the truth that was coming. Dominic stood a short distance from Elara as she rested on the edge of the long leather sofa. But the tension brewing inside him made the air in the room feel strangely dense. The storm outside had quieted to a low drizzle, yet inside the Romano estate the pressure only grew stronger. Elara lifted her eyes for a moment, trying to read the expression on his face, but she quickly lowered them again out of habit. Years of working in wealthy homes had taught her that silence was safer than curiosity, and obedience was safer than questions. She held her belly with both hands, her breathing slow and careful, waiting for whatever came next. Dominic turned toward the hallway, but before he could call for someone to bring food or dry clothes, the low murmur of voices echoed from the corridor. Two men approached, talking loudly, their boots striking the wood floors with careless confidence. These were his men, loyal but blunt, accustomed to power and entitlement. They were not used to seeing their boss standing beside a housemaid, especially one who looked as fragile as a winter branch. When the men rounded the corner and entered the living room, they stopped abruptly at the sight of Dominic and Elara. Their surprise quickly twisted into something sharper. One of them, a tall man named Rocco, narrowed his eyes as he looked from Dominic to the soaked woman on the sofa. He scanned her from head to toe, lingering on her pregnant belly and her trembling hands. Well, Rocco muttered with a smirk that did not belong anywhere near a woman in her condition. "Boss, we were wondering what was taking you so long in the storm. Did not think you were out rescuing strays." The other man let out a low chuckle. "A pregnant maid, huh? Guess the house needed a charity case tonight." Elara flinched at the word charity, her eyes dropping toward the floor as if bracing for another blow she had learned to endure in silence. Dominic turned his head slightly, and the room fell still. He did not raise his voice. He did not move quickly, but the shift in his posture was unmistakable, like a calm ocean suddenly revealing the weight of the tide beneath it. "I have heard enough," Dominic said, his tone low and even, without a hint of heat. Rocco blinked, confused by the quiet threat layered beneath the words. "Boss, we were only joking." He took a careless step forward, eyes drifting again to the necklace glinting at Elara's collarbone. He frowned. "What is that? Does not look like something a maid would own. Maybe she picked it up from one of the rooms when no one was watching." Elara stiffened as if the accusation had physically struck her. She opened her mouth to speak, but Rocco reached toward her as if to snatch the necklace from her neck. Dominic moved before her breath could leave her lungs. His hand shot out and gripped Rocco's wrist with a force that made the man drop to one knee almost instantly. The sound of bone creaking filled the room. Rocco let out a sharp cry, his free hand slapping the floor for balance. "Do not touch her," Dominic said, each word cold and precise. The second man froze, his face draining of color. No one in the room dared breathe. Dominic released Rocco's wrist only when the man bowed his head in fear. Stand up and leave. Both of you. They obeyed instantly, stumbling toward the hallway, clutching their pride and wounded wrists. Their earlier arrogance dissolved into silence. When the room was finally empty again, Dominic turned back to Elara. She sat frozen, her wide eyes filled with shock and confusion, as though she could not understand why he had done any of it. He spoke quietly, almost gently, a stark contrast to the sharpness she had just witnessed. No one touches you. Not in this house. Not while you carry that child. Elara swallowed, her voice barely steady. I did not mean to cause any trouble, sir. Dominic shook his head, his expression unreadable. Trouble was already here long before you walked into this room. The words lingered in the air like a truth too heavy to speak out loud. As he placed a glass of water on the table beside her and adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, Elara finally allowed herself to look directly at him. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes she had never expected to find in a man known for violence and power. It looked almost like fear. Not fear of her, but fear of what her presence and her necklace had awakened in him. And as the storm clouds thinned outside, a different kind of storm tightened its grip inside the Romano estate, one that neither of them was prepared for. Elara sat very still on the large leather sofa, her hands gently cupped around her belly, as if the warmth of her palms could steady the trembling inside her. Her breathing had calmed, but her heart had not. The echo of Rocco's accusation lingered in the room like smoke that refused to clear. She kept replaying every moment, every careless word, every step she had taken that night. Each memory only tightened the knot inside her chest, until she could barely swallow. Dominic stood a little distance away, his back partially turned as he poured water into a crystal glass. His shoulders were tense beneath his shirt, and the line of his jaw looked carved from stone. He was a man who rarely allowed emotion to betray itself on his face, and yet there was something different about him now. Something strained, something uncertain. When he returned to her side and set the glass down, Elara whispered a soft thank you and lifted it with careful hands. Even that simple act required more strength than she wished to admit. Dominic watched her for a long moment before speaking. His voice was lower than before, almost quieter than the rain outside. You did not cause this. Do you understand that? His words floated into the room like a fragile promise. Elara nodded, but her eyes drifted to the floor again. Sir, she said with a trembling breath, I do not want to stay where I am not wanted. I do not want to bring trouble to your home or your men. I am only here because of the storm. I can leave once I regain my strength. Her voice grew softer with each word, shrinking into the quiet space between them. Dominic stepped closer, not towering over her, but steady, like a wall that refused to crumble. You are not leaving this house tonight. You can hardly stand. She tightened her grip on the necklace, the cold metal pressing into her palm. Sir, people like them believe I am nothing, she whispered, her voice cracking. They always have. If I speak, I am too bold. If I stay silent, I am hiding something. If I work, I am uneducated. If I am tired, I am lazy. If I show I am afraid, they laugh. If I show I am strong, they find ways to break me. Her throat tightened so suddenly she had to stop speaking. For a moment, she looked as if she might shatter right in front of him, glass thin from too many storms, too much cruelty, too many days of pretending she did not hear the comments that followed her in every room she cleaned. She lowered her eyes again and whispered the words she had carried all her life, like a quiet shield. My mother always told me to keep my head down. She said dignity is something we must protect even when others try to take it away. So I stay silent. It is safer. The room went still. The rain slowed to a soft whisper against the windows. Dominic felt something shift inside him, something old and unwelcome. He recognized that silence she carried. The way she flinched. The way she held her breath when men raised their voices. It was the same silence he had seen on the face of the woman who once wore that very necklace. He remembered her shaking hands, her trembling voice, her quiet strength that never asked him for anything except mercy on the night she last appeared before him. He swallowed hard and spoke with a patience that surprised him. Keeping your head down may have protected you once. But in this house, silence will only convince dangerous men that you can be stepped on. And no one steps on someone under my protection. Elara lifted her gaze slowly, uncertainty flickering across her face like a candle struggling to stay lit. But why, she whispered. Why protect me at all? Dominic did not answer immediately. He looked at the necklace again, its surface catching the soft light, its familiar pattern cutting into memories he had spent years burying. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but heavy with meaning she could not yet understand. Because your mother was right. Dignity must be protected. And because the past never stays buried forever. His gaze locked with hers. And your past is tied to mine in a way you do not know yet. Elara felt the air leave her lungs as the weight of his words settled over her. In that quiet room, surrounded by wealth and shadows, she realized something she had never believed possible. The truth she had been told to wait for was finally beginning to find her. Dominic remained standing near the edge of the living room, his posture still as stone, while Elara tried to understand the meaning behind his last words. The quiet inside the Romano estate deepened, and the sound of the soft rain outside felt distant, almost unreal, as though the house itself had drawn a breath and was now holding it. Elara kept one hand over her belly, the other resting on the blanket he had placed around her shoulders. She felt strangely protected and exposed at the same time, as if the walls of this mansion had shifted and she no longer knew which direction was safe. She looked at Dominic with wide, uncertain eyes, waiting for him to speak again, but he did not. Instead, he turned slightly away from her, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if searching for something he had lost long ago. The way he stood there, silent yet tense, made it clear that the truth weighing on him was not an easy one. After a long moment, he looked back at her, his voice calm, but edged with something she could not name. I need you to understand something very clearly, Elara. Not a single person in this house acts without my approval. Not a single person touches what I protect. That includes you. His words were not loud, but they carried a force that filled the room. Elara swallowed, her breath catching slightly. She wanted to ask him why he was saying these things, why he was suddenly stepping into her life with this unexpected sense of authority and concern. But she could not form the words. Instead, she listened as he continued. When you walked into this house months ago, you kept your head down. You did not speak unless spoken to. You made yourself invisible. That is how people survive in harsh worlds. But invisibility comes with a cost. It invites cruelty. It invites suspicion. And tonight, you saw what that cost looked like. Elara looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She had lived her entire life, trying to remain small enough to avoid being hurt. She had learned that silence was safer than protest, that kindness was often mistaken for weakness, and that people saw what they wanted to see when they looked at a woman like her. She whispered, I have always tried to stay out of the way. I do not want to anger anyone. Dominic stepped closer, his footsteps slow and controlled. There was no anger in his voice, only a steady conviction that made her lift her eyes again. You did not anger anyone. You exposed them. There is a difference. A small breath left her lungs, almost like a sigh she had held back for too long. Dominic studied her face for a moment, then spoke with a tone that was quieter, almost thoughtful. When I entered that room earlier, I did not come looking for you. I came because something felt wrong. I heard the voices. I heard the disrespect. And then I saw how you held yourself, not fighting back, not crying out, not even raising your head. He paused, his jaw tightening. I have seen that kind of silence before. It was a strange thing to hear from the man who commanded so many, a man she had believed incapable of softness. Elara blinked slowly, unsure how to respond. Dominic continued, his voice sinking lower. Your mother wore that same silence. The way she protected you even before you were born. The way she looked at the world as though she knew danger was always a step behind her. His gaze dropped briefly to the necklace. At her throat, the metal catching the warm light from the chandelier. He did not touch it, but his eyes lingered on it with a weight that made her pulse quicken. I do not know how much she told you, he said, but I saw her once, many years ago. She was hurt. She was afraid. And she was holding that same pendant as if it was the only truth she had left. Elara felt her breath vanish. Her heart stumbled painfully in her chest. You saw my mother, she whispered. When? Why? Dominic did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow breath, the kind a man takes when he is preparing to reopen a wound time never truly healed. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Long before you came to work here. Long before you were born. But tonight, When I saw that necklace around your neck, I knew the past had found its way back to me. And it was not finished. The room went utterly silent. Elara felt the warmth drain from her face, her pulse fluttering beneath her skin. In that moment, she understood with sharp clarity that the truth her mother told her to wait for was no longer approaching. It had already arrived, standing right in front of her. Elara felt the room tilt for a moment, as if the walls themselves had leaned in to hear Dominic's words. Her mother, this powerful man, feared across the city, had seen her mother. Not in a passing way. Not in the casual intersection of two strangers whose lives never touched again. He spoke with the weight of memory, with the tone of someone who had carried a truth for many years. Her fingers curled around the pendant, the metal warm now from her trembling hand. She could not stop the quiet question from slipping out. What happened to her? Dominic did not answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the tall window where raindrops slid down the glass like a trail of silver tears. His silence said more than words ever could. When he finally spoke, his voice was slow, almost cautious. Tonight is not the moment for that truth. You are exhausted. You can barely keep your eyes open. Elara wanted to insist, to press him for the story that had lived like a shadow at the edge of her life since childhood. But her strength was slipping away. Every heartbeat felt heavy, and her back ached from a long day that had not given her even a moment of mercy. Dominic noticed. He stepped closer, his gaze sharpening with quiet concern. You are shaking. Are you in pain? Elara shook her head quickly, though the ache in her lower back said otherwise. I will be all right. I just need rest. The baby has been restless today. Dominic lowered his voice. You should have told someone. You should have told me. She looked at him, surprised. Sir, I am only a housemaid. There are rules. I was not hired to cause trouble or to ask for help. I am just here to work and to keep my head down. Dominic lifted one eyebrow. His voice dropped to a steady, controlled tone that carried the weight of authority. I do not care what you were hired for. You carry a life. That alone gives you the right to be safe in this house. Elara pressed her lips together, fighting the sudden sting in her eyes. For so many years, she had been told to endure, to stay invisible, to survive quietly so that no one had a reason to hate her. And yet this man, who owed her nothing, spoke to her as if her well-being mattered. The room was quiet for a long moment, until the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the hallway. Heavy boots. Confident strides. Dominic turned slightly, his posture tightening. Before he could speak, a guard called out, his voice impatient. Boss, we need to talk. It is important. He walked into the living room without waiting for permission, his eyes landing immediately on Elara. The guard's expression twisted into irritation. She is still here. We heard she caused trouble downstairs. Maybe it is better if she leaves before she drags more issues into the house. Elara flinched, instinctively shrinking into herself. Her breath hitched with quiet humiliation. Dominic did not move. He did not speak. But the silence that fell over the room was sharp as a blade. The guard hesitated at the shift in the air, finally noticing the cold steel in Dominic's expression. Sir, I meant no disrespect, but this looks bad to the others. Keeping a housemaid sitting in your living room as if she belongs here. Dominic's voice cut through the room like thunder. She does belong here. The guard froze. Elara did too. Dominic stepped forward, his gaze cold and unwavering. If you or anyone else in this house speaks to her with even an ounce of disrespect again, you will not step foot in this mansion another night. Do I make myself clear? The guard swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Dominic's voice remained deadly calm. Good. Now leave. The guard retreated instantly, disappearing down the hallway with hurried steps. When the last echo faded, Elara let out a small sound, somewhere between fear and disbelief. She looked up at Dominic, her voice almost a whisper. Why are you doing this? Why defend me when you barely know me? Dominic held her gaze, and for the first time, she saw something human behind the powerful exterior. Because I do know you, more than you think, and I cannot watch history repeat itself. His gaze returned to the necklace, then lifted to her face with a depth that made her heart stutter. The last time I failed someone wearing that pendant, I lived with the consequences for many years. I will not fail again. The room felt impossibly still, as though the entire house waited with them. And with those words, Elara realized she had reached the moment her mother had warned her about. The moment when silence would no longer protect her. the moment when the truth would demand to be heard. Elara felt as if the world beneath her feet had shifted. Dominic's words hung in the air with a gravity that made her chest tighten. The room seemed too quiet, too still, as if every shadow in the Romano estate had paused to listen. She kept her hand over her belly, steadying the small movements of the child inside her, while her other hand held the pendant that had suddenly become the center of everything. Dominic stood only a few steps away, but the truth settling between them made the distance feel both impossibly close and unbearably heavy. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "Sir, please tell me what happened to my mother." Dominic inhaled slowly, as though gathering pieces of a memory sharp enough to cut through time. The rain outside softened to a faint whisper, and the warm glow from the chandelier cast long shadows across his face. "You deserve to hear the truth," he said, quietly. "But the truth is not simple. It never was." He began pacing very slowly, each step controlled, deliberate, almost as if he feared the memories might spill out faster than he intended. "I was very young when I met her, younger than the man you see now. My family was at war with another group, a fight that never should have reached innocent people." Elara's breath caught. Innocent people. She knew what that meant. She knew the weight of those words because her mother had lived with that weight for many years. Dominic continued, his gaze fixed somewhere far away. "One night, I found a woman injured near the docks. She was alone. She was frightened, but she was holding her ground with a strength I had never seen before." He paused, lowering his voice. "She was holding that same necklace." Elara's heart twisted inside her chest. Her mother, alone, hurt, trembling, holding the pendant that now rested at her own throat. Dominic's voice deepened as the memory resurfaced. "I wanted to help her. I brought her to safety, at least for a while. But she refused to stay. She said she could not be seen with anyone from my world. She said she needed to disappear before the danger followed her." He stopped moving, standing so still that the faint sound of the rain became the only remaining noise in the room. "I told her I could protect her, but she did not believe me. Or perhaps she believed that my protection came with risks greater than she was willing to accept." Dominic's voice tightened. "She left before I could find a way to help. And when I tried to track her down, she was gone." Elara held her breath, knowing instinctively that this was not the end of the story. "There is more. Is that right?" she whispered. Dominic nodded once, his jaw set. "Some time later, I learned the truth I never wanted to hear. She had been targeted. Someone believed she carried information that never existed. She was hurt because of men who wanted power, men who did not care about the lives they destroyed." Elara's throat tightened until she could barely breathe. Her mother had always avoided speaking about the past, but the way she cried some nights, the way she held her daughter close, the way she feared the sound of raised voices, all of it suddenly made sense. Dominic took one step closer, his voice steady but heavy. "I never learned what happened to her after she disappeared. I spent years searching for any sign of her, but nothing ever surfaced. She vanished into the world, leaving only the memory of her courage and that pendant." Elara felt her eyes sting, tears threatening to fall, but she forced herself to speak. "My mother survived. She lived long enough to raise me. She protected me until her last breath. She said the past would find me when the time was right." Dominic's gaze landed on the pendant with a mix of recognition and regret. "And now that time has come." Elara pressed the necklace to her chest. For years, she had believed she carried only her mother's memory. Now she understood she carried a story shaped by danger, sacrifice, and a truth her mother had tried to outrun. Her voice wavered. "Sir, if my mother feared you would bring danger to us, then why did she give me this necklace? Why keep something that ties us back to that night?" Dominic did not hesitate. "Because she wanted you to find the one person who failed her, so that he would never fail you." The words washed over her like a cold wind, leaving her breathless. She had never expected her life to intersect with Dominic's, never expected her mother's past to collide with her own future. And now, standing before the man who had once tried to save her mother, she felt something inside her shift, a quiet resolve awakening beneath her fear. The truth was no longer hiding. It was standing right in front of her. The living room of the Romano estate had become impossibly quiet, as though the truth Dominic revealed had drained the sound from the very walls. Elara sat with one hand over her belly, feeling each small movement of the child inside her as if the little life knew something important had just shifted in the world. The storm outside had thinned to a soft drizzle, but inside the mansion another kind of storm was gathering. Dominic stood before her, rigid and unreadable, though the weight in his eyes told a story he had never spoken aloud until tonight. He had known her mother. He had carried the guilt of failing her. And now, seeing Elara in his living room with that same pendant around her neck, something in him looked dangerously close to breaking. Elara drew a slow breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sir, you said you searched for her. You said she disappeared." Dominic nodded once. "Yes, I looked everywhere. But she left before I could keep her safe, before I fully understood the danger that followed her." Elara felt her heart twist with a mixture of sorrow and long-buried hurt. "My mother never spoke much about her past. She always looked over her shoulder. She always kept the doors locked. She always told me to walk quickly, to never talk back, to never draw attention. Now I understand why." Dominic's gaze lowered. "She wanted to protect you." Elara brushed her thumb against the pendant. "And she wanted me to find you." Dominic's jaw tightened just slightly, as though her words cut deeper than she realized. Before he could speak, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Loud, aggressive, uninvited. A group of Dominic's men stepped into the room without knocking. Their faces held a mix of confusion, suspicion, and something colder. The largest man spoke first, his tone far too bold for someone addressing the head of the Romano family. "Boss, word is spreading through the house. People are saying you brought a maid into the main rooms. A maid who wears expensive jewelry. A maid who is pregnant." His stare slid toward Elara with thinly veiled disdain. "And now everyone wants to know what makes her so special." Elara's breath caught. She instinctively pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her heart pounding beneath her ribs. Dominic did not move, but the air around him changed. His men continued, unaware of how close they were to stepping over a line they would never return from. "Maybe she is lying," one muttered. "Maybe she is a distraction planted by someone else. Maybe she knows things she should not. She should be questioned." Dominic's voice cut through the room like a cold blade. "She is under my protection." A heavy silence fell. The men exchanged glances. One of them took a cautious breath. "Boss, with all due respect, the last time you said those words, it did not end well. People died." Dominic's eyes darkened. That was a warning none of them should have spoken out loud. But the man continued, too foolish to stop. "And now this woman shows up wearing a necklace from that night. What are we supposed to think?" Elara stiffened as all eyes turned toward her. Suspicion, hostility, fear disguised as anger. Her palms grew cold. Her throat tightened. The pendant she had cherished all her life was suddenly a target. One of the men stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Let me see that necklace." Elara flinched, clutching it protectively. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory like a fragile shield. "Guard it. Never let anyone take it." The man reached out a hand. Elara stumbled backward. The sudden movement sent a sharp ache through her back, and she gasped softly, bracing herself against the sofa. That single sound was enough. Dominic stepped in front of her, so quickly the room seemed to shift around him. "Touch her," he said with a calm so dangerous it made the air vibrate, "and you will not live long enough to regret it." The men froze. Dominic's voice rose only slightly, but every word carried the full weight of a man who did not negotiate with threats against the innocent. "The necklace stays with her. You stay away from her. And you do not speak about her again unless spoken to. Do I make myself clear?" The silence that followed was absolute. One by one, the men lowered their heads in obedience. "Yes, sir." Dominic waited until they cleared the room before turning back to Elara. She was breathing unsteadily, her eyes wide, her hand trembling around the pendant. Dominic spoke quietly, almost gently. "This house is full of men who have forgotten what dignity looks like." Tonight, they were reminded. Elara felt tears gather in her eyes, her voice trembling. "I did not mean to cause trouble." Dominic shook his head. "Trouble found you long before tonight." He paused, the truth settling into his voice with a gravity she could feel in her bones. "And it will not touch you again. Not while I am still standing." Elara sat very still after Dominic's men finally left the room, their footsteps fading down the hallway like an unwelcome memory being pushed out of the door. Her pulse still raced beneath her skin, the echo of fear clinging to her ribs. But there was something else now too. A quieter feeling. A steadiness. Someone had stood up for her. Someone powerful. Someone who did not gain anything by protecting her, yet chose to do it anyway. Dominic turned toward her, his expression still carved with tension, though a softer note had begun to settle beneath it. His voice was low when he spoke. You are shaking. Sit back. Breathe. Elara allowed herself to lean into the cushions, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. Her child shifted gently, almost as if sensing the change in her emotions. Dominic watched her carefully, then moved to the small table near the window and poured more water into her glass. When he returned and set it in her hands, she whispered, "Thank you, sir." Her voice trembled with sincerity, not fear. Dominic stood in front of her, not looming over her like a man accustomed to control, but like someone searching for the right words. For a long moment, he said nothing. The room felt warm and strangely safe, despite everything that had happened. Finally, he spoke. Let me ask you something, Elara. When you arrived at this house months ago, did you ever imagine you would end up here, in this room, wearing that pendant, facing the truth you were never told? Elara shook her head gently. No, sir. I came here because I needed a job. I needed a place to stay. I never imagined any of this. Dominic nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the pendant at her throat. When I saw that necklace tonight, I felt like someone had reached into the past and pulled it straight into this room. I thought I had buried that part of my life. But the past has a way of finding what it is owed. Elara held the pendant between her fingers, the familiar metal comforting beneath her touch. My mother always said the truth would come when I was ready for it. She said fear can blind you, but it can also guide you. I never understood her. Not until tonight. Dominic took a step closer. She wanted you to live, to survive. And you did. She would be proud of you. Elara's eyes glistened. I wish she had lived long enough to see her grandchild. Dominic's expression softened. She passed away before I could find her, he said quietly. But perhaps she knew that one day I would recognize the pendant. That I would recognize you. Elara blinked, surprised by the weight of his words. Sir, you did not know me. You did not know my name. Dominic shook his head slowly. No, but I knew the silence you carried. I knew the way you looked at the world, as if you were bracing for the next blow. That is the same silence I saw in your mother. She fought to protect herself. You fight to protect your child. Elara looked down at her hands, her breath unsteady. I never felt brave. I always felt afraid. Dominic lowered his voice. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is stepping forward even when fear tells you to hide. You came here alone. You survived things you should never have survived. That is courage. Her eyes rose slowly to meet his. In that moment, she did not see the feared head of the Romano family. She saw a man carrying guilt from a past he could not fix, offering protection in the only way he knew how. Dominic crouched slightly so that he was closer to her eye level, his voice steady. The men in my house will treat you differently now. Not because you asked for it, but because you deserve it. Respect will be given. Your child will be safe. And no one will ever question your worth again. Elara drew a trembling breath. Why are you doing this for me? Dominic paused, searching for the right answer, the honest one. Because when I look at you, I see the second chance I never got with your mother. I see the chance to protect what she died trying to save. His eyes softened in a way she had never seen before. I will not fail you. Not now. Not ever. The moment felt heavy, almost sacred. It was the first time in her life that someone speaking those words sounded real. The rain outside had nearly stopped, leaving only a faint rhythm against the glass, gentle and steady like a heartbeat. And for the first time since entering the mansion, Elara felt the fear inside her loosen, replaced by something warm and unfamiliar. Something that felt almost like hope. Elara held Dominic's gaze as the soft rhythm of the fading rain pressed gently against the tall windows, each drop a quiet reminder of the night that had brought her here. She felt the warmth of the blanket he had placed around her shoulders, but it was the warmth in his words that lingered deepest. A man like him was never supposed to speak with such honesty, yet he had offered her truths heavy enough to reshape the world she thought she knew. Her fingers curled once more around the pendant resting above her heart. The familiar weight felt different now, as if it pulsed with memories she had never lived but carried inside her all the same. She took a shaky breath and finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. Sir, there is something I need to ask you. Dominic stepped closer, giving her his full attention. His presence was powerful, but not in a way that overwhelmed her. Instead, it felt grounding, as if he was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly tilted. Elara took a breath to steady the tremble in her chest. When you saw my mother that night, did she say anything about me? Anything at all? Dominic held her gaze for a long moment. The muscles in his jaw tightened subtly, as though he was choosing every word with care. She did, he said quietly. She spoke of a child. She said she would protect that child with her life, even if it meant disappearing into the shadows. Elara felt her heart twist. That was exactly what her mother had done. Dominic continued, his voice lower. She told me she was afraid. Not for herself. For the innocent life she carried. She said she would go anywhere, do anything, hide from anyone, if it meant her child would be born free of danger. Elara pressed her hand flat over her belly, as if shielding the life within her from the ghosts of the past. That is who she was, she whispered. She never cared about herself. She cared about me. She always said that one day the truth would find me, but that it would not destroy me. She said I had to be strong enough to face it. Dominic lowered himself into a chair across from her, leaning forward slightly. His voice softened. And you are, whether you know it or not. Elara let the words settle around her, fragile and strangely comforting. Her mother had always carried a quiet strength, the kind that did not need to shout to be felt. And now, sitting in this room with the man who had known her mother in her most vulnerable moment, she felt a new certainty growing inside her. Dominic watched her as she traced the outline of the pendant with her thumb. There was something in his eyes she had not recognized before. Not anger, not guilt, something softer, more human. After a long moment, he spoke again. There is something else you should know. When your mother left that night, she told me one thing I never understood until now. Elara looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. What did she say? Dominic's expression shifted in a way she had never seen. Her exact words were, if you ever see my child, you will know them by this. His gaze dropped to the pendant at her throat. By the courage to stay silent, and the courage to speak. Elara felt her breath catch. Her mother had left her more than a pendant. She had left her a message. A compass. A way back to the truth. Dominic continued, his voice steady. Now that you are here, now that I see you holding that pendant, I understand what she meant. You did not come into this house by accident. You were meant to find the truth she could not tell you herself. Elara felt something warm rise in her chest, pushing past years of fear and uncertainty. She had always believed she was alone in the world, that she and her mother had lived in the shadows by themselves. But tonight shattered that belief. Her mother had not been alone. Someone had tried to help her. Someone had cared enough to remember. Elara drew a slow breath. Sir, if my mother trusted you, then I will trust you too. Dominic straightened slightly, the weight of her words settling with unmistakable gravity. You do not have to trust me yet, he said gently. Not fully, but you are safe here. That I promise. Elara nodded, her heart steadying. She believed him. For the first time since her mother's passing, she felt the quiet certainty that she was no longer carrying her burdens alone. She lifted the pendant once more, letting it rest in the center of her palm. My mother wanted this truth to reach me, she whispered. And now it has. Dominic watched her with a look that felt almost like recognition. Or acceptance. Or both. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Inside the Romano estate, the silence felt different now. Not heavy, not fearful, but full of the truth she had been waiting her whole life to hear. The quiet inside the Romano estate felt deeper than ever, as if the entire house had paused to breathe with Elara and Dominic. The storm outside had finally stilled, leaving behind a soft hush that wrapped around the mansion like a protective veil. Inside the living room, the glow from the chandelier cast warm light across the walls, reflecting in gentle patterns on the polished floor. Elara sat with both hands resting over her belly, feeling the soft movements of her child. She no longer felt as if she were sitting in a stranger's home. The truth she had waited for her entire life had finally reached her, and even though it had come with pain and questions, it had also brought clarity. Dominic stood near the tall window, his hands resting at his sides, his posture steady but weighted. The night had revealed more than either of them expected, and now he faced the truth he had run from for many years. Elara watched him for a moment, noticing the heaviness in his expression, the remorse woven through his silence, the quiet resolve that had begun to replace the guilt he once carried like armor. She finally spoke, her voice gentle. Sir, You said earlier that your past was not finished. What did you mean by that? Dominic turned toward her, the muscles in his jaw tightening as he gathered the right words. When I was younger, I believed that strength meant controlling everything around me. I believed fear kept people loyal. But fear is a dangerous thing, Elara. It spreads, it blinds, and it destroys what you never intended to harm. Elara listened closely, sensing the layers beneath his words. Dominic continued. The night I met your mother, I was not the man I needed to be. I wanted to protect her, but I was too late. I let my world touch someone who never should have been part of it. That is a mistake I have lived with for many years. Elara ran her fingers gently along the pendant, feeling its familiar edges. Her voice trembled slightly. My mother never blamed you. She always said there were good people in bad places, and that sometimes even the strongest people are not able to save everyone. Dominic lowered his gaze, as if absorbing the weight of her words. I wish she had lived long enough to know that I never stopped looking for her. Elara took a slow breath and shifted slightly on the sofa. Sir, there is something I need to say. Dominic lifted his eyes to her, fully attentive. My mother did not want me to live in fear. She wanted me to grow, to learn, to face the truth. And I believe she wanted me to be strong enough to forgive those who try to help her, even if they could not save her. Dominic's expression changed, the hardness around his eyes softening as if a wall he had built long ago had begun to lower. Elara continued, her voice steady despite the tremble she felt inside. She trusted you enough to leave this pendant behind. She believed you would one day recognize it. She must have believed you were capable of protecting what mattered most. Dominic exhaled slowly, a quiet and almost painful breath. You should not carry the weight of her pain, Elara. You have already endured too much. Elara shook her head softly. I am not carrying her pain. I am carrying her strength. I am carrying her hope. And I am carrying a child who deserves a life without fear. Dominic stepped closer, drawn by something deeper than duty. His voice lowered. You will have that. Both of you. His words were soft but unwavering, as if he had decided something important in the silence between them. Elara felt a warmth rise in her chest. It was not sudden. It was not overwhelming. It was a quiet assurance, a gentle sense that something had shifted inside this house. Something had shifted inside him. Dominic looked at her, as if he could finally see beyond the weight of the past. You and the child you carry are no longer alone. I cannot change what happened to your mother, but I can make sure her child is protected. I can make sure her sacrifice was not in vain. Elara felt her breath settle, her heart easing just a little more. This night had been filled with revelation, but now she sensed something else rising in the quiet of the room. Something like dignity returning. Something like justice approaching slowly, on steady feet. Dominic spoke one final time, his voice almost a vow. What happens next will honor the woman who gave you life. And it will protect the life you now carry. Outside, the clouds finally parted, letting a faint moon glow spill across the estate. Inside, both of them felt the night shift, as if the world itself had paused to acknowledge the truth that had finally been spoken. The soft moonlight filtered through the high windows of the Romano estate, spreading a pale glow across the polished floor and the quiet room where Elara still sat wrapped in the heavy blanket. The night had stretched long, filled with revelations and memories. Yet for the first time since she entered the mansion hours ago, the weight pressing on her chest felt lighter. Dominic stood a short distance away, watching her with an expression that carried both determination and an unspoken promise. The silence that settled between them no longer felt tense. It felt purposeful, as if both of them sensed that something important needed to be said before the night could end. Elara took a slow breath and rested her hand over her belly, feeling her child shift softly beneath her palm. The truth she had discovered tonight had reshaped everything she believed about her past, yet it had also given her something she never expected. It had given her clarity. It had given her understanding. And now, as Dominic stepped closer, she sensed it had given her something else as well. A future. He approached with steady steps and stopped in front of her, not towering over her, but standing in a way that offered silent reassurance. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. There is something you need to hear before you rest tonight. Elara lifted her eyes, steadying herself for whatever truth might come next. Dominic continued. What happened to your mother was not your burden to carry. It was mine. I lived with the regret of not protecting her. For years I believed that I had failed her. His voice deepened with a weight that had lived inside him far too long. But now, after seeing you, after hearing what she taught you, I understand that her story did not end in fear. It continued in you. Elara felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the quiet strength in his words. She whispered, "My mother wanted me to live in dignity. She wanted me to believe that goodness existed even in dark places." Dominic nodded slowly. And she was right. But dignity is not something you must fight for alone. This house may have been built on power, but power without humanity means nothing. He paused, letting the truth settle between them. From this moment forward, you and your child are under my protection. You will not be threatened. You will not be questioned. You will not be harmed. Anyone who disrespects you answers to me. Elara breathed in slowly, absorbing the weight of his vow. It was more than protection. It was acknowledgement. It was understanding. It was justice delivered in the only language a man like Dominic could speak. She whispered, "Thank you, sir." Dominic stepped closer, his tone softer now. "Do not thank me. This is something that should have been done long ago." The light from the chandelier reflected off the pendant on her chest, and for a moment Dominic looked at it with a mixture of sorrow and reverence. Your mother carried courage in her heart. You carry that same courage. And now you carry a new life. A life that deserves safety and dignity. Elara touched the pendant gently, feeling the familiar shape press into her palm. She thought of her mother, of the sacrifices she made, of the nights she held Elara close, whispering lessons shaped by fear and love. She thought of the truth that had finally revealed itself. She thought of the child inside her who would grow up knowing where they came from, not with shame, but with strength. Dominic spoke again, his voice deep and steady. There is one thing I want you to remember. The past may shape us, but it does not have to define us. What you choose from this night forward will belong to you, not to the shadows that followed your mother. Elara felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, the future did not feel frightening. It felt open. She rested her hand over her belly again, feeling a gentle movement from the child within, almost as if the little life understood the shift taking place around them. Dominic watched her, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time since the evening began. He spoke once more, his voice low and certain. "Rest now. You are safe." Elara met his gaze and nodded. She believed him. The room grew quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not heavy, not fearful. It was the quiet of a world settling into place. The quiet of truth finally spoken. The quiet of dignity restored. And that night, the world remembered what dignity looks like.